Hello all, and welcome to the January Patch Tuesday webcast. We will begin in just a few short moments, but I'd like to remind all attendees that they are currently in listen-only mode. But please feel free to ask the panelists questions at any time, and we will answer them during the live Q&A session at the end. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Rob Brown.
Thank you, Heidi. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Patch Tuesday of 2021. Thank you for everyone joining us today on the live broadcast, and if you're watching this in the recording. We really appreciate you joining us for the next 50 to 55 minutes. We have a lot to go through for Patch Tuesday, for third-party updates, for Linux and for Mac, so everyone is welcome. And as usual, I'm joined by a specialist in my team. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Rob. Hi, everybody. John Cassell, Solutions Architect with Syxsense. I am based in sunny Southern California. Been in IT for many years, specializing in desktop, server operations, and at Syxsense, I work in pre-sales, customer onboarding, and training.
Thank you, John. And just once again, I'm Rob Brown, Head of Customer Success from our UK head office. One of my teams is responsible for cybersecurity, one of them being patch management, and we've deployed over 100 million patches over the last decade. So I want to give some feedback. So with this webinar has actually been going for 6 months now, which has been brilliant, and we received some fantastic feedback and questions both during the webinar and at the end, and sometimes actually when we post that this webinar is coming up. And I want to talk about one question that we had, which I don't think we had a chance to answer the last time, which was what happens when Patch Tuesday is not available from Windows Update? Now, sometimes Microsoft actually change the audience of a patch. So they have their traditional tool sets like SCCM and WSUS, and then the Windows Update. And it really depends on what Microsoft has decided where their audience is for that patch. When we announce on this webcast, there's a CVE that's being remediated. If you can't find it in your Windows Update, you can search for the CVE in a Google, and you can go to the security catalog, which is provided by Microsoft, and you can download it from there. Lucky enough for us at Syxsense, we have all the content added to our console, and all, I would say most other vendors also put their CVEs in their content as well. But please continue to send these questions. They're really brilliant to help us provide what it is that you want to see during this 1 hour per month webcast. So we have some news, and right at the top, we've learned that TechSmith Snagit, which is a screen capturing support tool, is a screen capturing tool. They dropped support for Windows 7. Now we know that obsolete software is a target for vulnerabilities, so we highly recommend, if you're using Snagit on Windows 7, to uninstall it, or if possible, upgrade to the next version of Windows. There was also a fix for check disk in that KB number. Basically, check disk, there was a malfunction within the check disk in the last update on solid state drives, where it would auto repair continuously and cause a blue screen. So search for that KB and make sure you download the very latest version if you're using Windows 10, 2004 and 20H2. And also 17008 was released. It's a weaponized, it's known as a 0-day vulnerability, and we are actually going to cover more on this later on in the webcast. But the fix that was released in June of last year was actually found to be faulty. So Microsoft released a fix to fix this very thing, and it didn't work. And actually just recently it's been weaponized. So that's a really urgent vulnerability to target. Also, if you're still, a lot of our viewers are Windows 7, that's fine. If you are using Windows 7, you need to enter the ESU 2021 year 2 because it starts this month, which means you need to relicense all of your Windows 7 machines so that you can get that content. If you don't license the device and you try to install the content, it will actually roll back. So it's really important that you start your preparations straight away. And also, I think John is going to bring up the PSExec. There is a 0-day vulnerability that was released in the PSExec toolset for pipe hijacking. So that is not an actual patch that we're able to recommend today via Microsoft, is it's an application. So if you're using PSExec or any of the tools from sysinternals who actually were purchased by Microsoft, you need to re-download the latest version. Okay, John, you've got some fantastic research for us on our third-party priorities this month. Would you want to take us through what you've been looking at?
Absolutely. Before starting, as I typically say, that third-party updates are, of course, just as important as operating system updates to remedy any potential vulnerabilities you mentioned, especially with software that does go out of date, like Snagit no longer supported on Windows 7. Well, of course, maybe there might not be an update for it. You may even need to uninstall. So always be, it's important to stay on top of it. I'm actually going to mention a few of those today. Since last month, many updates have been released to resolve various issues. But first, a brief moment of silence. Adobe Flash Player has finally come to an end. It's been 24 years since first introduced, and it's been a great ride. The popular plugin has not only allowed artists to express their ideas or developers to create addicting games, but also has served very useful to so many businesses for not only internal applications, but of course, back in the 2000s, building attractive websites. Now, this is also great because it's been reported for so long in various articles throughout the years that Adobe is at the top of the vendor list for resolving the most vulnerabilities, because they're introducing them as well. Most of these vulnerabilities, of course, created by Adobe existed in that Flash framework. Fortunately, within the past few years, most web applications have since moved on from Flash with alternative options like HTML5, Web Graphics Library. Even at the time, others maybe weren't so common, like Ajax. There were always, other options out there, but of course, there are now standards to most of it. If you're still utilizing Flash in your environment, please push for a successor immediately, as there will be no more support. I've actually kind of poked around in some communities as well, tech communities, including Reddit as well, and I've read how some are still stuck with it. So there are definitely use cases out there. There are situations where companies are declining to find a successor. Well, it is unsupported. Please get off of it. If Flash is still installed, please uninstall as soon as possible, not only within an environment, but for consumers too. Adobe is directly recommending this to help secure your systems, as they stated on their website, and they, along with major browser vendors, will continue to block Flash content now that we're past the end-of-life date. Adobe also issued patches for 7 critical arbitrary code execution flaws across multiple products. These products include Campaign Classic, Photoshop, Illustrator, and Bridge. Anybody using these products on Windows, Mac OS, or Linux should update as soon as possible, given the quantity and higher severity of these flaws. Mozilla Firefox and Thunderbird have received multiple updates since last month. Firefox version 84 was released in mid-December, just after our last call, resolving a critical vulnerability in memory, among many other lower severity bugs, as well as introducing some new features and improvements for Mac and Linux users. Version 84 was also the final version to support Adobe Flash. Thunderbird received an update at the same time for the same critical vulnerability, as well as a number of graphical fixes. It should be noted that Thunderbird may behave sluggishly on Mac OS Big Sur. Read some reports about that. I didn't read anything about it being resolved since, so I would assume that maybe that's still outstanding. Firefox and Thunderbird also received some updates this week for a critical use after free write vulnerability. So if you happen to be using them, just like the rest, of course, update as soon as possible. Microsoft Edge was updated multiple times since last month. We mentioned it if you've seen the other calls as well. The Chromium architecture has been receiving a lot of updates in the past few months, not only because of huge influxes of people using or relying on these particular applications for working from home, but there's some other issues that have been reported, not to get too particular into it, But if you happen to be using a Chromium-based browser, definitely update. Particular to Edge, the most recent update has a high severity, and these range from use after free flaws to heap buffer overflow and even out of bounds write issues. Flowing into the next, Google Chrome, same exact, for the most part, same architecture, did update for Windows, Mac, and Linux, and for the same flaws mentioned with Edge, since they are, again, both Chromium-based. The number of fixes for Chrome totaled 16 and should not be overlooked. Most, of course, will be updated automatically, but not everybody has that setting, or of course, you can tweak some settings within the browser, so do ensure that the latest update gets applied. Last but not least, Wireshark version 3.4.2 was released mid last month. I wanted to highlight this one particular because of a medium to high severity vulnerability that was resolved. This vulnerability for CVE 2020-26422 allows the potential for a Wireshark crash by injecting a malformed packet onto the wire or by convincing someone to read a malformed packet trace file. Other than this resolved bug, there are some additional fixes and a compatibility fix for Mac OS Big Sur, but no new protocols released in this version. Additional products have also seen updates since last Patch Tuesday, including Adobe Reader, Dropbox, FileZilla, KeyPass, Notepad++, Opera, RingCentral, Skype, WebEx, and Zoom. And if they ever get saved to the end, the reason for this is just there weren't too many major fixes, no major release to highlight like the rest. And of course, the biggest thing, there weren't any major vulnerabilities. Lastly, my monthly reminder to all administrators to always include third-party patching in the patch management process. It, of course, is not just about the operating system updates. Anything can be considered a vulnerability, a potential attack vector. Before sending it back to you, Rob, one thing I did want to highlight as well, there was a 0-day from Microsoft. This is regarding CVE 2021-1647, Microsoft Defender remote code execution vulnerability. The vulnerability was described as a remote code execution bug that allowed threat actors to execute code on vulnerable devices by tricking a user into opening malicious content on a system where Defender is installed. Microsoft said that despite exploitation being detected in the wild, the technique is not functional in all situations and is still being considered to be at a proof of concept level. However, in my research, other sources reported that this vulnerability does have potential to be exploited, has been exploited for the past 3 months, and may or may not have even been leveraged by hackers as part of the massive Sunburst attack this year. After perusing the list of operating systems in this update, it appears that it can affect pretty much any supported version of Windows and Windows Server. The attack vector is local, low complexity, low privilege is required, but no user interaction. To counteract future attacks with this particular vulnerability, Microsoft has released patches for the Microsoft Malware Protection Engine, which won't require any user interaction, and it will be installed automatically, unless it is specifically blocked by systems administrators, which is actually quite common. Microsoft stated customers should verify that the latest version of the Microsoft Malware Protection Engine and definition updates are being actively downloaded and installed for their Microsoft anti-malware products. Back to you, Rob.
That is brilliant. Thank you, John. And actually, I have put something in regarding Windows Defender in the slide deck. So that's awesome to hear that we've got the same research. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so as we usually do, we have a topic, and we've been through many topics from CVSS to the top 5 ideas to protect a system. This topic is patch testing strategies. Now, this is a testing strategy that we've been using for well over 15 years in our managed services to help test patches for success before going to a live deployment. A lot of testing strategies that we are helping our clients with typically involve like deployment to a few machines and then to wider machines and then to live machines. And that's absolutely fine. And if you've got the time, the testing strategy I'm going to recommend, or present today should take you no more than a few hours in the week of Patch Tuesday to complete. So it's really just about organizing and getting the strategy right. And we are going to be putting this onto our website in a download form. So we're going to use six topics to the testing strategy. The first is a list of golden rules. So golden rule number one, do not use your own machine to test updates. If your machine breaks because of that patch, or if it fails, that machine is obviously not going to work. You'll need to restore it. And if you've made the mistake of scheduling that deployment later on in the day, then there's a lot of anxiety. You'll need to access somebody else's machine to use your tool set to disable it. So please don't use your own machine. Number two, find out if the patch has an uninstaller. Not all patches have one, and that may be a surprise. If you do not have an uninstall with that patch, then you need to take extra precautions in testing it. It's really very, very important that you do that, because once you start installing it, the only way maybe to get it reversed is to restore the system. And lastly, don't forget to include your peripherals in your testing. So if you have USB sticks, if you have USB drives, if you have internal hard drives like we saw with the Mac OS, their solid state drive actually stopped working when an update was installed. It'll be very, very bad. It caused a lot of end user disruption, but also things like webcams and voice over IP telephones that you may be using. Now more people are working from home. You need to make sure that when you do your testing that there is somebody using your peripherals when the testing takes place. It would certainly be a bad idea if you were given a company meeting like this one only for the software to update a driver that caused the webcam to fail. And obviously if that was a company meeting, that wouldn't look very good. So please make sure you cover in your testing as many peripherals as you have available to you. Next is your preparation. So build a test rig of virtual machines. This is quite standard. Everyone recommends it. It's a brilliant way of building a rig. Use VMware, Hyper-V, which comes with Windows 10. Oracle VirtualBox is also for free, I believe. But you need to get some representative clones into that virtual environment. It's really simple to do. You could take your own machine, of course. When we talk about most representative, we're talking about operating system, Office, applications, printers, and your antivirus. Please don't forget your antivirus, because some antiviruses do see some patches differently. So those are the representatives we're talking about in here. And of course, we also need to do some research on your recall and rollback alerting. You don't just want to install everything, just double check by coming to us or to US Cert and the NVD websites to see what patches the vendor has recalled because of a problem. So just that's a quick check on our news page, which we're going to go to in a second, and you'll see all of the patches that we're recommending not to be installed or have been officially recalled by the vendor. So next, do some research. So the research is what we would typically call a patch steering meeting. These are meetings that take about 1 hour per month with some of our very largest clients. And it goes along the lines of what does the update actually fix? And this is sometimes quite difficult because vendors don't publish these days everything that the patch is going to affect. But you need to try to work out through your tool set what the update is actually going to fix, what impact it could have on the device, and of course, what operating systems the fix is for. You need to find out if the patch requires a reboot as well. Some patches will only properly become effective on that reboot. So if you're installing on a Tuesday and you have a weekly reboot on a Friday, the time between Tuesday and Friday, you could still be vulnerable to be exploited. So you need to make sure that in the patches you're choosing, do you need to force the end users to reboot? And if so, you need to work on communication with the end users to expect it. And is it silent? So is the vendor suggesting that this is a silent install? Because end user disruption is the #1 thing we're trying to achieve. The reduction of end user disruption is the #1 thing we're trying to achieve in our patching strategy. So does the update require or cause end user disruption? This is how we've done it for over 10 years. We have our rig of 55 devices. Each of those is configured with Teams. There are other screen recording software available. We perform the test at a specific time of the week when we have the Teams recording the screen. At the end, the recordings are saved and we watch them back in fast forward mode. So we have the screens open, and in 15-20 minutes, an engineer is able to go through several of these at once to see what happened to the screen when that installation was taking place on that virtual environment. Okay, and what you're able to see is if something got closed down, if something popped up, you can pause the recording, go back and take a look. And because you've got the screen recording, you know exactly when it happened. So you've got the date and the time exactly on the recording. You can go take a look at the operating system logs. Let's just prove that it wasn't anything to do with the patching, because that's what you need to prove when something does happen to end users, because everyone blames patching when anyone actually is disturbed. And lastly, probably more important than end user disruption is how large. This is also quite difficult to find, but your tool set hopefully will have the size size recorded for these patches. If you put them all together, how much are you deploying to your devices? Do they have enough space? Can your network handle it? If your users are over VPN, do you need to break the deployment into smaller pieces? That's what you need to do to ensure that your selection of patches when you are deploying them are performed safely. It all forms part of the testing strategy. Next, identify some candidates. So these are 2 to 5 devices for each, 2 to 5 devices for each update that you want to deploy, such as that virtual test rig, pilots that are less risky. And I want to mention that trust works both ways when you're asking your colleagues to participate as a pilot, because they want to know that you're not throwing patches out that potentially could damage their devices, but you also want their feedback, their honest feedback about what they experienced during the deployment. So from that perspective, trust works both ways. Keep changing those users so that they don't always feel like they're the guinea pig, but those are the users that will really give you the best feedback if something goes wrong. And then if necessary, an extended pilot. So more devices, maybe if you are in a distributed environment and you want to deploy across network links, those are devices that you will schedule second. Now, in this scenario, the virtual test rig happens the day after Patch Tuesday, so it's Wednesday for us. So we do all of that testing in the rig on the Wednesday. The evidence is recorded, and Thursday we will then do pilots and extended pilots, AM and PM, and that way we can get through the entire testing strategy before the Friday. Success criteria. Did the software install correctly? So that's the deployment via your tool set will help you. Yes, it deployed successfully, and post-patch scanning proves the patch is no longer there, and was the user disrupted in any way? So those are your 2 success criteria if you've done everything right. Lastly, evidence. I'm going to give you some background into the evidence. Been in the industry 20 years. Windows NT4 was my first patch deployment, Windows NT4 workstation. And I learned something when something went wrong. And there is no louder silence than being asked what testing you did. If there's something goes wrong, and it does, if you've got your test evidence of the patches you deployed, the evidence you collected, then what comes next is what you learn in addition to what you've tested, what you need to test going forward. If a director of the business or if a CIO is asking you, what testing did you do because you've caused a large outage, you want something to provide them. And this doesn't take a lot of time. This was an extract from the patch management toolset we are using from a CSV file. We simply added a few extra columns and we're able to provide that. We do it every single month, but if somebody asks for it, we've got it. So even though this isn't used very often, collect your test evidence, have it there available, distribute it if necessary to actually say we are doing a great job and this is the testing we've done, and collectively people can be more confident that your patching and testing strategy is successful. So in this case, we have a little patch here for remote desktop, which actually closed remote desktop on that user's device. That was my machine, and so we would go through extra testing if something was to be found during that test. So evidence is really key. So I hope that's helped a lot of you that are asking for patch testing strategies. Nice and simple. It seems simple enough, but actually you'd be surprised if you break it down into smaller pieces. It actually does get a lot easier, and we'll be transferring this into a downloadable PDF very, very soon. So let's take a look at Patch Tuesday. If you're new to the webcast, Patch Tuesday isn't just 1 day per month. It actually is potentially 3 or 4. So last Tuesday was the very first one for non-security Office updates. There is actually something to show you, to mention. They're all for Office 2016. So we have Access, Office, Outlook, and Project. But the Outlook patch that was released last week, was to fix the crash that was occurring to Office from last month's update. So if your Outlook crashed, it was probably this bug that they fixed, but it wasn't security related, so it was just a UI issue that they've resolved. Yesterday we had 83 security fixes, which is slightly less than what we've been having for the last several months. And obviously in December we had a really great reduction for the Christmas holiday period and New Year, but it looks like it's going back up again. We also didn't have any .NET Framework updates in the 3rd week of December, but we do have that 0 day, and we do have an advisory to quickly mention this month. So there is actually 1 0 day and 1 advisory. The 0 day is what John mentioned. It's to do with Windows Defender, and I'm going to cover more on this, but this is a very, very serious one, so it will be in our selection. Don't think just because you're not using Windows Defender that you don't need to patch it. And as I explained, there's a DLL that is used by Windows Defender that is there even if you have an antivirus that has disabled it. If the DLL still exists, it can still be used. It can still be weaponized. But this is the advisory. It's the servicing stack. Hopefully this advisory will be resolved when everyone upgrades to Windows 10 2004 cumulative updates. At the moment, if you're not on the very latest feature update for Windows 10, you need to make sure that you install your servicing stack updates prior to any patching in order for those patches to be safe for install. So these are prerequisites. They are essential. They are more like conduits between the software and the hardware. So that's why they are classified as critical. And if you don't install the latest servicing stack and you try to patch a device, it's likely that the patch will actually roll back because it's not stable. Okay, so before we get into what we're going to prioritize, we're going to quickly mention how we're going to prioritize it. And we've been using this these 6 factors for quite a while now, and it really does help us to break out the huge list that we've had recently into smaller chunks of patches, especially if in your testing you're not able to deploy them all. So if you can't deploy them all, this is a way of breaking them into the different severities. The first one is we've got to use the vendor severity. I don't think anyone is brave enough not to use the vendor severity in their selection. But as you'll see, sometimes the vendor severity and the industry severity, which is your CVSS score, is different. So we put the two together. So we use the two. We use the highest of each of those as a gauge for which we should be prioritizing. Then we used weaponized status. So weaponized status, like the defender, is where there is an attack using the bug, and if it is weaponized, we are going to be recommending this is one of the top to be installed, simply because it's already being weaponized, actively being exploited. Now, public aware is where somebody has published the exact mechanism to exploit the bug. So this isn't the case that the patch exists. Public aware is that somebody has explained exactly how to exploit a bug in the operating system or in a third party. And so all it takes is somebody to write some code and deliver that code to a device without the patch, and it can obviously be weaponized at this point. They come along via bug bounty programs, and there's a lot of bug bounty programs at the moment. Some fantastic security analysts looking for these bugs and letting the vendors know when they exist. And obviously that's how a lot of these bugs are actually being identified and fixed, which I think is brilliant for the security industry. Now we have countermeasures. They're the things that really help us to mitigate the severity of a vulnerability. And countermeasures exist in two types. We have one which is a mitigation. So the mitigation is that maybe you've got this advanced antivirus that is able to help you. That mitigates the need for the patch, and then you've got a workaround. So maybe there's a registry key you can set, or you can turn something off or disable a service. If there's a countermeasure available, it means that there is something other than the deployment of a large patch maybe to resolve the vulnerability. So we use countermeasures to kind of balance it. Now, if you're not using Syxsense, this is fine. Take these 5 factors along with the CVE, pop the CVE into your tool set, and see how many devices are needing that particular patch. In Syxsense, your exposure is automatically calculated, so it works out all of these and says these are the patches that are recommended based on all of the 5 above plus your exposure. Okay, and as we also have had some fabulous feedback from before, we don't put the recommendations in this webinar. We actually have it up on our site. It's actually published on the day of Patch Tuesday. So if you go to syxsense.com, I'll just bring it across. We'll go through it together and we'll have a walk through. So if you go to syxsense.com, there's a news page here. We have a holding page directly for Patch Tuesday, which you can open. Or if you go to the news page, you can see all of our other links for all of the other work that we are working on. If you have any questions about anything, strategies, testing, content, you can actually ask us down here. And as I mentioned, there is actually already quite a few strategies for endpoint security and patching. You can download them from the top. So here we've got the Patch Tuesday 2021 fixes. So we just click on Read More, and we're able to look at this online. It doesn't ask you to log in. It doesn't ask you for an account. This is very public for everybody. But if you don't want to come to the website every month, you can subscribe. So if you subscribe to it here, enter your details, click that button, and you'll be sent an email every time we put anything up to our news page. So as we go down, we'll look at the 83. Of the 83 fixes we received yesterday, 10 were critical from the vendor and 73 were important. That covered pretty much everything from Windows, Edge, all the way through, except another month without Internet Explorer 11, which I think is actually quite surprising. This is the second month. We didn't have any in December, and we haven't had any now. Hopefully everyone's moving off this browser anyway. But if you are still using Internet Explorer, it doesn't have any patches this month. As I said, Year 2 extended support for Windows 7 and 2008 is now in effect, and you will have 5 important vulnerabilities fixed in this list. So let's see. The first one I'm going to mention is the Windows Defender. I'm not going to go through this. JC did a brilliant intro to this. It's 1647. It is 1647. What I've researched is that the MPENG engine.dll is actually the DLL that needs to be updated, and it provides the scanning, detection, and cleaning capability for the antivirus platform. Now, what we find is that some of our viewers are using other antivirus products, and that's fine. And what happens is the antivirus product disables Windows Defender. It doesn't uninstall it, it simply disables it. Even though in its disabled state, that DLL may not get updated. So in this case, please, you still need to deploy that patch to resolve that CVE. The next one I'll mention is 1648. Now this is SPL WoW 64. This was public aware, so this is the one public aware vulnerability for this Patch Tuesday. Again, the one thing about public aware is the time between it being publicly aware on the internet, where you can find the exact mechanism to exploit the bug, and coming up with a weaponized threat can sometimes be very short. So public aware is a key factor. Yes, something could happen, and better to be safe than sorry. So we'll start to roll this out straight away. This particular vulnerability resolves an issue where you're using 32-bit printer drivers on 64-bit operating systems. Still, a lot of our clients and viewers are using legacy software. That's also fine. And not everyone can move across to 64-bit. So if you are using software that can only use a 32-bit driver, you will probably most likely need this vulnerability. And lastly, the Hyper-V. So I mentioned Hyper-V as a tool for patch testing. I've selected this for a very important reason. It is only important from the vendor and has a moderate risk on the CVSS at 7.7, but we know that a lot of organizations are using Hyper-V to set up their secure stations that they use to access their network. They try to create this sandbox back to the corporate network using their VPN. Now, what's important about this is we've added something brand new this month. We're going to call it the 6-score risk alert. The 6-score risk alert are the details from the CVSS, which is the independently assigned score that gives you a level of risk about how bad this could be. Now, we just quickly go through those. So the attack vector is local, meaning you need to have access to the device. Its attack complexity is low. So privileges are low and user interaction is none. So attack complexity means how difficult is it to make your way into the system. And if it's low to medium to high. So this is right at the bottom, and it's a risky thing in itself. But if we look at the last one, is it a jump point? Now this is called its scope. So its CVSS scope is yes. Now what does that mean? That means that you can use the Hyper-V vulnerability to jump into other technology on that device. So you can hop in via Hyper-V and you can move into Windows 10 or Windows Server OS laterally. And so if we take a lesson that we've learned from SolarWinds, this is what they did. They jumped in through one vulnerability and they moved sideways within the OS. So the original attack vector was this way, and then they moved into the system and they caused a lot of havoc. So that's why we're highlighting that, because Hyper-V is used, and we certainly wouldn't want a vulnerability to come in through Hyper-V and then jump onto the guest running on that machine, because that means they're within the sandbox that you're trying to create to secure your users working from home. Also, I mentioned that those 6 factors that we have, they're all recorded here inside these columns. The CVSS score, the countermeasure. We have recommended this from top to bottom, with our recommended on the right side. And every one of these has been recorded with the 5 factors that we know of. The 6th, of course, is your exposure, and you need to put that CVE into your tool set and work out which ones of these are important to you. So, John, I think you've done some research, haven't you, on one of these? Did you want to talk about it? Maybe I can bring it up.
Yeah, I found a pair of updates. This would be for CVE 2021-1669 and 1674.
Oh, yes.
Perfect. So this would be for Windows RDP security feature bypass vulnerability, as well as core security feature bypass vulnerability. Both have CVSS score of 8.8, Microsoft severity of important. This does affect all operating systems from Windows 10 onwards, including Windows Server. It is a network attack vector. Complexity is low, privileges are low, no user interaction, no jump point, but still very concerning. Now, most in the industry aren't using RDP too often anymore, of course, or strictly for internal reasons, but it can always, just like, even if you're not using Defender, the files are still there, it can still be exploited. So very important to get both of these deployed, especially not just based on a recommendation, but you can see it right there. The CVSS is quite high. And that's how the industry has standardized it, so definitely get these pushed out.
Yeah, yeah. So anything that is 9.0 or above is known as critical, and critical in its more serious term. So that's why there is multi-levels of severity from the CVSS. So that's almost on the cusp of actually being very, very serious. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you, John. So let's talk about some issues now. If you've been with us before, you'll know that we have always announced vulnerabilities that have caused issues in our lab. We actually do continuous testing throughout our lab. We're always changing a few things, different software, different third parties to see if we can generate an issue. And we haven't found any for quite a while, but this is still one that Microsoft has published on their release notes. So if you're using Windows 7 SP1 or Windows Server 2008 R2, certain operations may fail on clustered shared volumes. It's been there for a while. What they recommend is that you perform extra testing in a test lab before you go to live devices. And also this one has been here as well before Windows 10, 1909 onwards. If you're upgrading from 1809 or newer, you may find that your user certificates may get lost, and that's because the service and stack updates haven't been installed yet. And also we have a issue with a Japanese input method editor. Microsoft is still working on a solution for that, but that's been at least 2 months now that I've seen this still listed as a known issue for patches of that operating system. John, do you want to quickly walk us through the feature update roadmap?
Yeah, absolutely. Since last month, nothing has changed, but to highlight from last month, it's been a month since 1903 reached end of life, and that means that this is the first month you actually won't receive updates if you're still running it. And 1903 was actually one of I think, the first version, apologies, of standardizing the end of life date between both editions, or I should say all editions. So it doesn't matter if you were on a consumer edition of Windows or business edition, the end of life is the same. And we estimate it could change. Of course, this year has introduced a lot of change. The past year has introduced a lot of changes with regard to Windows 10 end of life cycle, and there have been a lot of extensions. What we've seen from the spring releases is that they're going to be standardized. If you are still running it, make sure to get upgraded. As mentioned last month, it's still acceptable to stay on an end of life version in that same month, as long as you'll still receive the last batch of updates. But it is imperative to migrate before the next month. So now we're at that next month because anyone that's still in 1903 did not receive updates for January. Upgrade to a newer version as soon as possible, such as 1909, 2004, 20H2. 2004, for example, will be the next one that does have a standardized end of life too. So if you would like to get a little bit more time out of that, if you are running an enterprise or business edition, choose the fall releases such as 1909, which will have an extra 6 months, or 20H2, which now has the longest life cycle of all. Yeah. Regarding the rest of the versions here, especially with Home and Pro being a consumer, no changes, but again, 1903, definitely get off of that one. Next slide, Rob. Enterprise, no change either, but as you see there, the date for the expiration of 1903, it's the exact same. So that's what we'll expect to see going forward.
Just for anyone in the UK, these dates are all American format. I think I should probably change that round, because for me, I thought, oh, I've got the wrong dates. I haven't marked the ones in red. I made a mistake, but yeah, so these are all American dates.
No change for long-term support either. If you are using these, of course, you've got a very long life cycle for your devices. Hefty price tag typically as well, but again, saves you a lot of effort, a lot of tedious effort, especially because you're not actually introducing as many changes for your long-term devices. But no change with any of their life cycles.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, John. Okay, so this is new. This is the Linux of the month. Now, we were putting this into our slide deck, and a lot of users said that could we have something outside of the slide deck, because they want to take the page and download it. So what we've done is we actually added that to our news page as well. And you may have seen that. Here we go. So top vulnerabilities for January. And I think, John, you've done a little bit of research on these. Are you going to take us through what we've got here?
Yeah, absolutely. A few to highlight. I'm going to go through these, of course, in level of severity. So the first ones I'll mention are at the highest. First would be Samba update for Amazon Linux, Red Hat Enterprise 7, and Oracle Enterprise 7. Vendor severity is critical. Across all of these, CVSS score is 10, and that's the highest it can possibly be. So if this applies to you, make sure you get your packages as soon as possible. A flaw was found in the way Samba handled file and directory permissions. An authenticated user could use this flaw to gain access to certain file and directory information, which otherwise would be unavailable to the attacker. There are actually multiple CVEs in this particular update as well. That was only the one. A null pointer dereference flaw was found in Samba's WinBind service. This flaw allows a local user to crash the WinBind service, causing a denial of service. The highest threat from this vulnerability is to system availability. Also, a flaw was found in this is a very interesting one, portion of this update. Flaw was found in the Microsoft Windows NetLogin remote protocol, where it reuses a known static zero-value initialization error, apologies, and a certain encryption mode. This flaw allows an unauthenticated attacker to impersonate a domain-joined computer, including a domain controller, and possibly obtain domain administrator privileges. So if you happen to be using, again, Amazon Linux, Red Hat 7, Oracle Enterprise 7, get the update applied. There's also a kernel update for Oracle Enterprise 6 and 7. Oh, thank you, Rob. Vendor severity, and here's where we kind of have mentioned in the past that when we look at Linux, it is of course not like looking at Microsoft where we're talking about not only one particular platform, but one manufacturer. Linux, we're going to have many, and their ratings may not match from one to the next. Even if the package is very similar, it could have a different vendor rating. The vendor severity here for Oracle is going to be a moderate, but the CVSS score is 9.8, and that's pretty much near the top right there. You're only a 0.2 away, but that's an extremely high score. A heap-based buffer overflow was discovered in the Linux kernel. This flaw could occur when the station attempts a connection negotiation during the handling of the remote device's country settings. This could also allow the remote device to cause a denial of service, system crash, or possibly execute arbitrary code. Moving on to the next update for SUSE, Manager Client Tools. SUSE gave this particular vulnerability, or this update rather, for the vulnerability, a moderate rating, but a 9.8 score from the industry. In Salt Stack, it improperly validates authentication credentials and tokens. A user can bypass authentication and invoke Salt SSH. So this is a bit of a dangerous one as well if you happen to be using SUSE. Also discussing SUSE, the next update, security update for Python 36 on SUSE Linux Enterprise Server 12 Service Pack 5. This vendor severity, very interestingly, comparing the two, this one is actually from SUSE, has a vendor rating of important, although as we see the CVSS score is the same at 9.8. Python Test Suite calls eval on content received via HTTP. If an attacker can compromise the server, they gain arbitrary code execution on all build bots. If an attacker has control over the network connection of a machine running the Python test suite, they gain arbitrary code execution of the whole system. So quite a few for SUSE. If that happens to apply to you, I don't want to say drop what you're doing, but definitely want to prioritize those. A couple more, because I want to be able to cover all the operating systems, of course, all the vendors. libproxy update for Ubuntu 20.1, 20.04, 18.04, and 16.04 LTS. This has a vendor severity of medium. So now we kind of get in another situation where the terms might not match up. Medium could kind of be the same as what you would say moderate, but in this case, they use a different terminology. Although to standardize it again, CVSS score is 9.8. libproxy incorrectly handled certain pack files delivered from a Windows 10 device. An attacker could possibly use this issue to cause a crash or execute arbitrary code.
Yeah.
And the last, I kind of mentioned this a little bit before, but now to specifically talk about which devices it applies to. Security update for Mozilla Thunderbird for SUSE Linux, as well as Red Hat, specifically SUSE 15 Service Pack 2, and Red Hat versions 5, 6, 7, and 8, so widespread for Rail. Vendor severity is critical. CVSS score is 8.8. When reading SMTP server status codes, Thunderbird writes an integer value to a position on the stack that is intended to contain just 1 byte. Depending on processor architecture and stack layout, this leads to stack corruption that may be exploitable. So those are the top 6 for Linux. If anything we've mentioned here, of course, goes without saying, we recommend to deploy out and make sure that you remediate those potential issues.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully, if you are using, I'm not sure what tools generally you're using in the Linux world, but if you are using a combined solution that does Windows and Linux, you should be able to put these CVs in just like this and deploy those as quickly as you possibly can. I actually noticed that there's quite a few Microsoft issues affecting Linux here, so it's quite a
yeah, I mean, it makes sense why it's got such a higher score, because if you are in a mixed environment, that's even more dangerous.
That's right.
Especially if you're more skilled in one version, one particular platform or OS than the other. And definitely just proves that you should just deploy the updates on a routine schedule.
Yeah. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you, John. So we have one little one for Mac OS there.
Yeah. Big Sur was released very recently, within the last couple of months. There has been a new update to 11.1. We discussed, I believe, 11.0.1 last time, so this one's slightly larger. Released to the public on December 14th. This version adds support for AirPods Max and introduces a new Apple TV Plus tab in the Apple TV app, as well as a few other feature enhancements. In the App Store, however, one thing to highlight, the update introduces a new privacy information section for each app that includes a developer-reported summary of that app's privacy practices. And I really like that one. I think that's actually a great thing for Apple to include, that maybe other vendors should follow suit with. That's a great thing to add, especially for even in the Microsoft Store or for others. To if you're going to provide content from other vendors, you should also allow some type of information for your customers to see what do they say about it, how secure is this particular product. There are also a few fixes for bugs with Bluetooth, LG Ultrafine Display, and QuickTime Player. Apple also seeded the first beta. I'm sorry, moving on. There's another update actually, or sorry, there's a vulnerability in that update, CVE 2020-29620 with a CVSS score of 7.8. Apple macOS could allow a local malicious user to gain elevated privileges on the system caused by an error in the kernel component. This can definitely be exploited to execute arbitrary code with system privileges. So although we don't talk too much about it, we don't hear too much about vulnerabilities within Mac, but this one has been highlighted, and I would recommend it. Also, they have seeded the first beta of an upcoming Big Sur 11.2 update to developers and beta testers, so the next one's already being rolled out. This update does appear to focus on bug fixes and other under-the-hood improvements, but it may also include some fixes for ultra-wide displays. There have been many reports about resolution issues in Big Sur, and now that, of course, technology and displays are advancing, we've got very wide displays, and there might be some issues there with Big Sur.
Sure. Yeah, I do remember the last one we talked about, 4K screens was causing an issue. So wonderful. That's brilliant. Thank you, John. I think we've got about 5 minutes left, or maybe 3 or 4, 5 minutes left. I think I can see quite a few questions coming in. Firstly, I would like to say thank you for watching us today. If you do have questions and you would like a more private response, you can go to the Syxsense website, put your question into the chat, and we can answer them. And of course, anything we get after this webinar, until the next one, we can answer at the front end as well. So Heidi, did we have any questions that you think we might be able to answer straight away?
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. The first one has to do with Windows 10 1903, and they asked if I still have devices on Windows 10 1903, what happens now?
Great question. Technically, you can continue to use it as long as you want. The massive concern, of course, that every business as well as consumers should now, as you know, we've been hearing for over the past few years, that you should be concerned about security. You're not going to get the latest updates. The day that particular version was marked as end of life was the last Patch Tuesday you actually received any changes, and they won't extend it. They would have extended it well before that end of life date. It's never going to be retroactive. So again, you can continue to use the OS, but you're not patching your machines. There is no way to. The only thing you can do is, you know, move to a new version of Windows 10.
Yeah, and if they do try to install a patch, as we know, we had someone say they tried before. If they download the patch from the Microsoft site, which they can, if they install it, it will install okay until you reboot, and then it will roll it back. And rolling back updates is far more technically challenging than installing them, for sure.
Thank you. The next question is similar. What happens when the patch is not available from Windows Update?
That was the question I think we had. That may be the same person that asked at the end of the last one. So basically, Microsoft decides the audience that they want the patch to be available for. And sometimes Windows Update, if you're running the Windows Update on your machine, sometimes it's not intelligent enough to know the type of hardware you're using. And some patches are for specific pieces of hardware, or just because Microsoft does not want Windows Update users to have access to it because of the extra settings that are needed. Sometimes a patch, after it's being installed, needs registry changes or some configuration changes. And that's typically done by somebody from an IT department. So that's why they would publish it to WSUS or to their SCCM platform, and they wouldn't necessarily release it to their Windows Update platform.
Great, thank you. Also had a question, why would Google not disclose all of the bug information in their latest Chrome update?
Rob, you mentioned a little bit about this one. Of course, if it has been made public, then it could be a very short life cycle, short amount of time in which that then becomes exploited. That's to put it simple, of course. If we know about it, then we know what there is to exploit regarding that. So a lot of the times, third-party vendors specifically, you might see something a little bit different or experience something different with organizations like Microsoft, which they are going to provide as much information as possible. And many do rely on third-party researchers. Google specifically in some cases, or again, other vendors too, may withhold that information to ensure that nobody knows how to exploit it, whereas they are aware of it, but the industry or anyone else in the world will not be made aware. So there's nothing there to really understand. It's like telling somebody, here's the back door to, to this location. If you don't tell them, then they won't know.
Right, exactly.
Rob, I think we've ran out of time. I did let everybody know in chat that if we didn't get to their question live, that we will follow up with them privately after the webcast.
That's wonderful. That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much for everyone joining us today. We really enjoy these webinars, giving all of our insight, and we really value the last hour spending with us. I hope that this has helped you to plan your patching strategy for the next month, and we really look forward to seeing you here again in February. Thank you. Stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.